while we're waiting for others to join us, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature you wish to discuss. I don't hear you. Don't hear you.
Hi, I'm trying to get Judy and Yudit hooked up to you right now. I'm just doing my best to sign them in. Sorry, one sec. What's that? Here? Like this? Okay. Okay, here you go. I got you. Recording in progress. You line out. Okay. Thanks, Rav. Thanks.
Okay, all is well. Oh. Good afternoon. How are you? Don't hear you. Okay. Nope, no, can't hear you. No.
No, yeah.
Yes. Sohorayim tovim. Toda.
I'm so gratified. Tovim, correct, tovim. I'm so gratified. The I am ending is usually used for dual. Yadayim, sha'atayim, chodshayim. The only exception is the word Soharayim. There's nothing double about it, but it's still Soharayim. Shinayim, because you have top, upper, and lower teeth.
Wow.
So a double stop. What do you call two dots? A double stop, a colon. Yes? Nukudatayim.
Ah.
Yeah.
The ma'im shomayim.
Shemayim. Oh, no, nothing to do double about that. So it's Soharayim and Shemayim, two words. Very good. In Arabic, you speak Arabic, don't you?
I'm a little rusty.
Because I know you live in the Near East, so I just assume I just assume that you speak Arabic. In Arabic, the ending is ain for two of a thing. Kitab, book, kitabain, two books. And in Arabic, unlike Hebrew, you can use the word for anything. Anything which comes to, like kitab, a book, kitabain, two books. Three or more books, kutub. Kutub. Arabic makes the plural by changing the vowels in the word. Kitab, one book, kutub, three or more books.
Wow.
Two books, kitabain.
מאוד מעניין.
Yeah. Before I begin, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature you wish to discuss.
I think it's going to be in the category that you'll say you decline to answer, but I'll try anyway.
I know that you're interested in many things which interest me intensely, but not everything that interests me, and I think you intensely, is really halachic. Okay, let's give it a try.
Yeah, I'm going to ask, but then you can say it's not nogea. But okay. What would be the halacha of non-Jews residing in the Holy Land, in Eretz HaKodesh?
Unthinkable. It depends which goyim you're referring to.
Okay.
The halacha, which is the basic halacha is not controversial. Basic halacha, all the poskim agree to. It's the details where we have disagreements. The basic halacha is that a ger toshav is allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael and allowed to own land in Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's the difference between a ger tzedek and a ger toshav? The difference is that a ger tzedek is someone who is mekabel, accepted upon himself or accepted upon herself all the mitzvahs and is fully Jewish, just like you or me. A ger toshav, on the other hand, has only accepted upon himself or herself the 7 commandments of Bnei Noach. But a non-Jew who has accepted the 7 commandments of Bnei Noach is allowed to live in Eretz Yisrael and allowed to own land here. Now, exactly who's included in this can be somewhat controversial. According to Rav Herzog, he was the Rav Harashi after Rav Kook. Back in the days of Kum HaMedina, he was the Rav Harashi at the time of Kum HaMedina, at the time of the establishment of the state.
Was his name Evelyn? Evelyn Herzog? Was that him?
Oh, no. Isaac.
Yeah, because one of the Herzogs was Evelyn.
Okay, no, he was Yitzhak. he was a formidable Talmud Chacham. He was one of the great Talmudei Chachamim of the generation. And before coming to Eretz Yisrael to be the Rav Harashi, actually the phrase Rav Harashi didn't exist in those days. He was not the Rav Harashi, he was the Rosh HaRabbanim. Right? The title Rav Harashi didn't even exist yet. He was Rosh HaRabbanim. Al kol panim, he was a great Talmud Chacham, and he was originally from Lithuania, but he had been the chief rabbi of Ireland before coming to Eretz Yisrael, and he spoke English beautifully. His Rebbitzin also spoke English very well. She lived in Rehavia, which was the official residence of the Rav Harashi for many years. And back in the 1970s, this was after the death of Rav Herzog, she continued to live there in Rehavia, and she had an open house every Shabbat morning for Kiddush. And Shabbat morning for Kiddush, everyone who was anyone in Yerushalayim would stop by her house for Kiddush, and it was a great assembly of all the important people in Yerushalayim every Shabbat. Herzog, Rabbanit Herzog. I went a few times, and being very nosy, I took once the opportunity to look very carefully through Rav Herzog's personal library. And he had an extensive library, which he really didn't need the library so much because he knew everything by heart. I'll give you an example. There's a tshuva which wrote after the founding of the state. The British Parliament in London wanted to give a gift to the new Israeli Knesset, a huge menorah. That menorah stands today outside the Knesset, just across from the entrance to the Knesset. And when the Parliament in England made the offer of this menorah, the Torah observant Havrei Knesset were a little bit nervous about it. They weren't sure that whether or not it's permitted. After all, it's like an imitation of the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash, and the Shomrei Torah in Knesset, and this was the first Knesset, were not happy about that, and they asked Rav Herzog whether it's permissible to accept the menorah. Rav Herzog happened to be in Tveria on holiday when the question arrived to him by telegram, and he wrote back a tshuva saying, I am on holiday in Tveria, and I don't have a library. I don't have available to me, but the question is a pressing one, and I will respond anyway. He wrote a tshuva of around 30 pages, quoting at great length every sefer that had ever spoken about this issue, all by memory.
Wow.
At the end of the tshuva, he came to the conclusion that according to most poskim, it is prohibited to accept the menorah, but one of the great poskim, namely the Bach, is lenient, and therefore he writes at the end of the tshuva, he writes, since they're not going to listen to me anyway, if I tell them it's prohibited, I will not tell them that it's prohibited. I will just tell them, yesh al mi lismoch, there is an authority to rely upon, namely the Bach. He's the one who permits it. The following tshuva in the Tshuvot Ktavim of Rav Herzog is a letter which he wrote to his brother-in-law. He had a brother-in-law, Rav Hillman, who was a Rav in London. He wrote a letter to his brother-in-law in London, Rav Hillman, saying that the British Parliament is making this menorah as a gift to the Knesset. Please go, he wrote to Rav Hillman, my brother-in-law, please go to the foundry where they're making this menorah, and please make sure of 3 things. Number one, there are going to be images, there are going to be pictures on the face of the menorah of great figures in Jewish history. Number one, make sure that the founder of Christianity is not pictured as one of the great personalities of Jewish history. Number two, please make sure that all the other great figures of Jewish history, David HaMelech and so forth, are portrayed fully dressed. And number three,
requests.
and number three, please make sure
The
that
wedding. I'm leaving something for someone to pick up.
please make sure that when they're ready to pour the bronze into the mold, please make sure that it's a non-Jewish worker who pours the bronze into the mold. Now, we learned from this an important approach of Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog, unlike most of the other Rabbanim in those days, and indeed, unlike most of the Rabbanim nowadays, Rav Herzog recognized that he's unable to be mitaken, he's unable to do everything he would want for Jewish society. But even when he was unhappy with the situation, like the menorah, which he held is basically prohibited, nonetheless, he was willing to jump in with both feet, kidei letaken, masha efshar letaken. He was willing to jump in with both feet to at least improve what he was able to improve, even though he was unhappy with the whole situation. That was the approach of Rav Herzog. Even if you cannot make things perfect, at least you should do what you can to make them as good as possible. That was Rav Herzog. So when I was looking through his personal library, I could not help but notice that he had an entire set of English translation Cincino Talmud. And I took 1 or 2 volumes off the shelf to look at them, and they were very well used. And I asked the Rebbitzin, I say, I noticed in the Rav's library an entire set of Cincino English translation of the Talmud. Why did the Rav need that? He was a great lamdan, and he knew everything by heart. Why did he need an English translation of the Talmud? And the Rebbitzin told me, well, often he had to make speeches in English, and he didn't want to have to take time to think about the English translation of a Talmud passage. He knew the whole Talmud by heart, not only the original, he knew the whole English translation by heart. So in a flash, he could just quote the English translation if he was giving an English speech. I don't know how it got to Rav Herzog, but that's that.
We were talking about so Ger Toshav is allowed to
his famous tshuva about mi'utim, about the minorities in Israel. He has a long tshuva analyzing the theology of all the principal branches of Christianity, the Eastern Church, the Western Church, the Protestant denominations. The tshuva then goes on to analyze the theology of the principal Islamic groups, the Shia and the Sunni and so forth and so on. And he comes to a conclusion that none of them are Ovdei Avodah Zarah. And therefore, if we're talking about a Christian or a Muslim who accepts upon himself or who accepts upon herself the obligation to live a moral, ethical life, they are allowed to live in Eretz Israel. Okay, is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, I'm very impressed that you went elaborated to that degree. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. What I want to talk about today is Mehadrin being strict above and beyond the requirements of Halacha. Now, sometimes it's just silly to do something which is of no Torah value. Just because you've invented your own strict practices, which do not contribute at all to the observance of Torah or spiritual elevation, well, if there's no benefit to it, it's just silly. Let's see what the poskim have to say about strictness. Specifically, I'm going to focus on kashrut, but the principles have broad application throughout the length and breadth of Torah. You know, I share screen, I think. Voila, I got it. It says in the pasuk, "V'omar, aha, Adonai Elohim, hine nafshi lo mituma nevela trefa lo achalti minu'urai v'adata v'lo ba b'fi b'sar pigul." Yecheskel Anahi says, I have never eaten anything which is usser in my whole life. This is what Yecheskel Hanavi said about himself. I've always been very careful to eat only kosher things my whole life. The Gemara quotes this pasuk and interprets it as follows. What does he mean? He never ate anything which is a treif. What did he mean? He means lo achalti besar couscous. Ever. Now the basar that he's referring to, that he never ate, was a behema misukenet. A behema misukenet is an animal which has been injured or an animal which is sick. At the moment, it's able to walk around and appears healthy, but it doesn't have a good future to it. And therefore, the owner of the animal might want to shecht it very quickly while it is still shechtable, so as not to lose the financial value of the animal. That's a behema misukenet. And Yecheskel Hanavi never ate from that kind of shchita. Lo ba b'fi b'sar pigul, I never ate any other category of prohibited food, means lo achalti behema shehora b'hacham, any animal which required the approval of a rabbi, I did not eat it. I ate only animals which were so obviously permitted. The shechita and the internal examination of the organs led to the conclusion that the animal is so obviously permitted, no consultation is required with a Rav in order to inspect everything. It's all obviously permitted. That's what I ate. Whenever a Rav had to be consulted, and the Rav had an opinion, a svara, the Rav had an opinion that the animal was kosher, I refrained from eating it. Yecheskel Hanavi never relied upon the opinion of some Rav that the animal is permitted. He ate only from food which is so obviously okay that no one's opinion had to be solicited, no Rav had to be asked about it. Well, we see from this that Yecheskel Hanavi was mahmir. Of course, he did not hold that the Jews who were following the advice of the Rabbanim and eating the animal were sinners. Of course, he didn't hold that. But for himself, he wanted a personal higher standard of consciousness so as not to rely upon the opinion of some Rav. That's a standard of Mehadrin, which he embraced for himself. Let's see what the poskim have to say about defining exactly when it's proper to be strict. First, Miri lived in France. Miri lived in France in the High Middle Ages. He writes as follows: Safek isur. The animal is shechted or the food is cooked. It doesn't have to be fleischig. Whatever is cooked, some question arises. Some question arises about the kashrus of the food. And you go ask the rabbi. Ve'ein lo bo heter min Talmud or min Kabbalah, and there's no obvious reason why this food should be permitted, no obvious reason based on a passage in the Gemara or verses in the Torah, no obvious reason why it should be permitted, Ella, but rather min hasvara levad. The rabbi, based on his reasoning, the rabbi, based on his understanding of the sources, he says kosher. Well, if it's only the rabbi giving his opinion based on his understanding of the sources, ra'ui, it is correct, l'harchik mimeno, it is correct not to eat that food. It's permitted, and someone who eats it is guilty of no sin. You don't have to do tshuva, but this is a case where being strict is ra'ui, is correct. Nothing silly, nothing stupid, nothing wrong about being machmir in a case like this. Im harabba laheta mutar. If the rabbi decided that it's permitted, so it's permitted. I mean, that's the halacha. Ella she'ein yohara l'bishin nimna melochla. But someone who is strict and refrains from eating it is not guilty of prideful behavior. After all, yohara, that's the Aramaic word for ga'ava, pridefulness is, of course, wrong, and therefore someone who is pridefully strict, oh, I'm such a tzaddik that I only eat this and I only eat that. Wow, if one is pridefully strict, that's wrong because pridefulness is wrong. But in this case, if the reason that you refrain from eating it is because you don't want to rely upon the opinion of that Rav, you're off the hook for being guilty of pridefulness. Lo od, furthermore, Midas hashlamim shelo la'achol b'behema shehora b'hacham al derech zo, or even more. The derech, the path of shlemim, the path of tzaddikim is to refrain from relying upon the opinion of this Rav or the opinion of that Rav, and just to eat things or outside of the field of kashrus throughout the length and breadth of Torah, just to do things which are simply, obviously, and straightforwardly permitted. Makol makom, in any event, davar ha'nodam in a Kabbalah, in any event, anything which is known to be kosher because there are verses in the Torah which tell us that it's okay. Right? The plenty of verses in the Torah tell us that it's permissible to eat dvash, honey. Plenty of verses in the Torah tell us that it's permissible to consume chalav, milk. You might think that milk should be prohibited because it's like aver min hachai, like a limb coming from a live animal, which is surely prohibited. But the Torah says flat out you're allowed to drink milk. You might think that honey should be prohibited because it's produced by bees, which are not kosher creatures. It doesn't matter what you think. The Torah says flat out that the dvash, the honey, is permitted. Well, if the permissibility is straightforward in the verses of the Torah, even though it might not be actually in a verse in the Torah, but it's in the Gemara somewhere as being obviously permitted. Things like this, you should not be machmir about. You should not be Mehadrin. You should not be machmir beyond what the Halacha requires, because that would be yohara, that would be ga'ava, that would be pridefulness. Hacham Shabbat Safik Isu Lefanav, if the rabbi is presented with some food and there's some question about it, the hitir, and he says it's permissible, Rashai likach me'oto davar shehitir, the rabbi himself is allowed to, of course, rely upon his own opinion, but it's not nice. It's not right. If a decision had to be made, and if it's only that Rav's opinion that it's permissible, then it's mechuar, not nice, that the Rav himself eats it. After all, the Rav should have a higher standard of kashrus. The Rav should be Mehadrin, and therefore, if the heter, the permissibility of the food, depends upon his opinion, and there's no clear pasuk, no clear passage in the Gemara which outright permits it, it's not right for the Rav himself to rely upon his own opinion. Now, according to this, Rabbanim should be Mehadrin. What about ordinary civilians like you and me? Is it okay for us also to be Mehadrin? Let's see what the Rosh had to say about this. Rabbeinu Asher, the last of the Baalei Tosafot, the end of the Middle Ages. Originally from France, he ended up in Spain. Kevan de Ori Bechachim. Since a rabbi's opinion had to be solicited, since some rabbi decided that in his opinion the food is permissible, how is it possible to rely upon that? The verse says, and we saw this verse earlier today, Yecheskel Hanavi never ate anything which was questionable. If a question had to be asked, and the Rav had to express his opinion that it's okay, Yecheskel Hanavi refrained from eating it. Yecheskel said, Lo achalti b'behema shehora b'hacham. If a rabbi's opinion had to be solicited, he refrained from it. Hani mili detalya b'svara, anything which depends upon svara, the rabbi's opinion, the rabbi's understanding of the sources, ra'ui, it's correct, it's proper, it's seemly, it's good advice to refrain from relying upon it. So these cases are cases where Mehadrin standards are justifiable according to these sources. Now let's take a look at what the Shulchan Aruch says. Yoredeya, Shulchan Aruch says as follows. These are the words of the Shulchan Aruch. Gedolei hachamim lo hayu ochlim mebehema shemimaharim v'shochatim ota. Great rabbis refrain from eating the meat of animals where they were in a rush to do the shechita. They wanted to shecht the animal before it died. They were afraid the animal's going to die, so they shechted real quick while it is still shechtable. Oh, rabbis didn't eat from the animals that were shechted, kedei shelo tamut. They were afraid the animal was going to die before it got shechted. Af al pi shepirkasa b'sof hashchita, even though the animal shook around and moved a lot, at the end of the shechita, it was still the animal was still active and still had strength in it. Still, the rabbis would not eat from it. Davar zeh ein bo isur. There's no prohibition to eat from a behema misukenet, an animal which was in danger of dying, and therefore they were in a rush to shech. There's no prohibition to eat from it. Ella kol haratzeh lachmir alatzmo b'davar zeh harei zeh meshubach, but it's praiseworthy. It's advisable. It's all kinds of good things to be strict and refrain from eating it. It's not at all prohibited, and the people who are eating it are therefore guilty of nothing and have no reason to do tshuva. Oh, but being strict is not silly. Being strict is not stupid. On the contrary, being strict is advisable. It's a good idea. The Chidah, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the great 18th century Rav of Hebron, he wrote, being strict in a situation like this, hurak ki ovid mitzad chumra v'geder l'kadesh atzmo b'mutar. In order to justify the chumra, in order to justify the strict position, you must know that you are only being strict. You must know that min hadin, you did not have to be strict. You must know that people who are not being strict are also 100% kosher Jews and can also be tzaddikim. In order to be permitted to be mahmir, you must understand that it's only a chumrah. If you make a mistake and think that what you're doing is required by halacha, and the other Jews who are following the Shulchan Aruch are somehow sinning, if you think that, then you're just flat out wrong, and there's no value in your strict position. La'an hadvarim magi'im. How far is this idea taken by the poskim? I'll give you the example of the Maretz Chayes. Maretz Chayes, 19th century. He was the Rav of Żokiów, if I pronounce it approximately correctly, in Poland. He was one of the most important of the Rabbanim in the 19th century. He's so important that his commentaries on the Gemara are printed in the back of every standard edition of the Gemara. In any event, he said, when the Rav paskens a shaila, someone asks the Rav, is such and such permitted, is such and such obligatory, whatever the question is, it's essential, absolutely required that the Rav pasken, that the Rav issue his decision in accord with the absolute minimum requirements of halacha. If he was asked, is such and such permitted? The answer, if there's room for leniency, the answer must be yes. Fundamentally, there's room to permit this. You have to tell the truth. Then, if the Rav thinks that it is advisable, if the Rav thinks that it is praiseworthy to be stricter above and beyond what halacha requires, then after having told the questioner that such and such is permitted, then the Rav can add, but I advise being stricter above and beyond what halacha requires and refraining from it. It is permissible, but I recommend being strict. Now the questioner can choose. The questioner can go home and eat what the Rav permitted, or if it's outside of kashrus, throughout the whole length and breadth of Torah, the questioner can go home and do what the Rav said is permissible. But if the questioner chooses to accept the advice of the Rav to be stricter than required, now the questioner will get a bracha, kol ha-mahmir, tavo alav bracha. The bracha will fall upon the questioner for being strict, with the condition that the questioner knows that he does not have to be strict, or she knows that she does not have to be strict and chooses to be stricter than required. If the Rav would merely give the stricter opinion as his psak, and the questioner would go home and do what the Rav said or refrain from doing what the Rav prohibited, you don't get any extra credit for that chumrah. You don't get any bracha for that chumrah because you're just doing what the Rav said. In order to get the bracha of kol ha-mahmir, tavo alav bracha, you have to know that what you're doing is above and beyond what is required of halacha. That's what we learn from the Birchei Yosef, and the Martz Chayes and other great poskim embrace this idea. Aval imosem mipnei sheyesh pikpuk be'ikar hadin. If you have a pikpuk, a doubt about the fundamental halacha, im mesukenet mutar al yedei pirkus, and you wonder, you're in doubt whether or not the shechita is valid at all, asur lachmir. Just because you have a doubt about whether or not the behema misukenet, which was about to die anyway, and they hurried up and shechted it before it had a chance to die, just because you have a doubt about whether or not it is acceptable, whether or not the shechita is acceptable and the animal is kosher, you're not allowed to be strict, because here you're being strict is against what it says in the halacha. In order to permit the strict practice, you, number one, must know that the strict practice is not required, and number two, you choose to embrace the stricter practice. Only then do you get the bracha of being machmir. In his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, the Shach says, behemat ovdei kochafen, an animal owned by a non-Jew. Like I have said, Mammon, if the animal is declared treif, there's no financial loss to anyone. The animal belongs to a non-Jew. If it's declared treif, he'll just sell it to non-Jews. No financial loss if the animal belongs to a non-Jew. There, it's fine to be mahmir. There, it's fine to be super pious. There, you can be very frum and very strict because there's no financial loss involved if you have to take a strict position and prohibit the animal. But an animal owned by the Jews, Mishum Hefsed Momen, there'll be a major financial loss if you declare the animal unnecessarily. If you unnecessarily declare the animal to be treif, afilu midas chasidus leka, it's not an act of piety to be strict when someone's financial loss is involved. Let's understand the basic idea here. First, a historical note, or as they say in Commonwealth English, an historical note. The Aussies say a historical note or an historical note? No. A historical note or an historical note?
I don't know what the Aussies say, but I say an.
Okay, that's Commonwealth English. In North American English, we say a historical. In any event, everyone knows that there's a big humor out there about glatt kosher. There's ordinary kosher and there's glatt kosher. What's the difference between them? There are two differences between them. Difference number one is a halachic difference. Difference number two is an economic financial difference. The halachic difference between them is that glatt kosher lungs on an animal were smooth. Glatt in Yiddish means smooth. Halak in Hebrew, smooth. And therefore, there were no lesions on the surface of the lung where a Rav had to decide whether or not the lesion is potentially fatal. That's a glatt lung, or halak in Hebrew. No decision had to be made about whether or not the lesion was fatal because there were no lesions. Ordinary kosher, there was a lesion found on the surface of the lung, and Rav was consulted and was of the opinion that it's harmless, and therefore the animal is kosher. That's the halachic difference between glatt and non-glatt. But there's also a financial dimension to this question. Since the days of the Gaonim, great rabbis in Babylonia, after the close of the Talmudic period, since the days of the Gaonim, the rabbis have been slugging it out about on the issue of glatt, whether or not it's okay to take ordinary kosher, or whether you must take glatt kosher. This has been, rabbis been fighting about this since the days of the Gaonim. You make long lists of the rabbis through the Middle Ages and into modernity on this side of the machloket, and the other rabbis on the other side of the machloket. Now, once you've made this list of the strict rabbis and the list of the more lenient rabbis, the lists correspond to an important financial question. There were places and times, both in the Muslim world and in the Christian world, there were places and times where the non-Jews did not allow the Jews to own their own cattle. In those places and times, what the Jews had to do was go to a non-Jewish slaughterhouse, choose one of the animals, and ask the non-Jewish owner of the slaughterhouse, can someone on our team slaughter this animal? And the non-Jew would say, why not? Save me the effort and the labor. If you want to do the labor and effort, go ahead and do it. You guys can slaughter the animal. Then they would open up the thoracic cavity, open up the chest, examine the lungs and so forth. And if there was any lesion on the surface of the lungs, there was no need to consult a rabbi, because the animal belonged to the non-Jew, and so that the Jews wouldn't buy it. That's all. and there'd be zero financial loss for anyone in this story. The non-Jew owns the animal. He was originally planning on selling it to non-Jews, and that's exactly what he'll do at zero financial loss. Oh, in historical situations where there was zero financial loss in being strict, those are the times and places where the rabbis said, don't bother me in making a decision about whether or not the lesion is potentially fatal on the surface of the lungs. Just shecht another animal. What's the problem? Well, why should we get involved in these questions? On the other hand, in those places and times where Jews owned their own cattle, a large farm. So to think about Switzerland today, the Swiss are very proud of their dairy industry. The dairy industry is quite important in Switzerland today. The largest dairy farm in Switzerland today has 11 cows. That's the largest in Switzerland today. Most farmers have 1, 2, or maybe 3 cows. That's all. And so it was through the generations before the industrialization of dairy farming. Now, with the industrialization of dairy farming, a huge number of cows in a single farm, but that's only nowadays. Back then, when Jews owned their own cattle, if a cow was shechted, a cow was slaughtered and found to be not kosher, they were talking about as much as a third, perhaps even a half of the yearly income for that Jewish farmer. That's a huge financial loss. In cases like this, in places and times where the Jews owned their own cattle, since declaring the animal to be treif led to major financial loss, there the rabbis exercised themselves to actually betake themselves to the slaughterhouse, inspect any questionable lesions, and decide whether or not the animal truly was kosher or not. So as the Shach teaches us, if there is no financial loss involved, chumra l'gedolei hachachamim kein, then it's correct for the rabbis to be strict and refrain from relying upon their own opinion. That's if there's no financial loss involved. As soon as there is financial loss, so what's mutter is mutter. That's all there is to it. Now, that's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, Reb Yosef Karo. The Ramah, the Ashkenaz posek, is basically in agreement. Let's see his words. An animal which was declared kosher because of the opinion of the Rav, and it's not, there's no explicit verse in the Torah, no explicit passage in the Gemara which flat out says that it's okay. Well, Baal Nefesh, someone who is seeking a higher level of spiritual life, lo yochal mimenu, should refrain from eating it. The Ramah agrees with Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, that there is room to be machmir. It's not silly, it's not stupid, it is a correct spiritual decision to be strict and refrain from something which depends upon the opinion of this Rav or the opinion of that Rav. Now, the question becomes a little bit more important. The question becomes a little bit sharper in situations which are clearly permitted. Let's take a look at the Solet Lemincha. He was one of the great 19th century rabbis. He quotes the Torah Asham, written by the Tosfos Yontef. These are heavyweight sources. Mi shirotze lachmir, someone who wishes to be strict. Linhog isur b'davar shematzinu shechmiru ba'amarai, someone who wishes to be strict on a matter which the Gemara is not strict about, someone who wishes to be stricter than what it says in the Gemara, kagon, for example, according to the Gemara, a prohibited ingredient in a mixture is bottle, insignificant and to be ignored if it's less than 1 part in 60. Less than 1 part in 60 is permitted, according to the Gemara. Someone who wishes to be strict and refrain from eating the mixture, which has a little bit of treif stuff in it, but less than 1 part in 60, have kamo apikorsis. That is heresy. V'yatzas chara b'hefsedo, and of no value at all. Being strict and prohibiting something which the Gemara permits is not only silly, it's a rejection of the tradition of Chazal. It's a rejection of the Masorah and the Kabbalah of Chazal. It's a rejection of the Torah Shebaal Peh, and that is apikosis, that is heresy. If, according to the Gemara, it's permitted, that's it. There's no room to be strict above and beyond that. Well, he's basing himself on the Torah Sa'asham. He said that he's basing himself on the Torah Sa'asham. Let's see exactly what the Torah Sa'asham had to say about this. Kol had motzi lach muri anafshe lasot mishneret. Anyone can be strict for himself. Anyone can be strict for herself in order to distance yourself from any violation. Even in a case where, according to the Gemara, the food is permitted. Hilkach habachash hava kemosif v'godeya. And therefore, when we say that being strict above and beyond what halacha requires is praiseworthy, an elevation in spiritual life, when we say that, we're not talking about being stricter above and beyond what the Gemara explicitly says is permissible. The Gemara says flat out that 1 part in less than 1 part in 60th, 1 part in 60 will not prohibit a mixture. Anyone who rejects that is guilty of heresy. If you want to refrain from eating anything where the Rav's opinion was required, well, if that's the situation, then there you are allowed to be strict. In order to be strict, you need a heter. In order to be strict above and beyond what halacha requires, you need a justification to be strict. And the justification which permits you to be strict above and beyond what halacha requires is where the decision depends upon the opinion of a Rav, not upon what is flat out explicitly stated in the Gemara. Gemara explicitly flat out states that 1 part in 60, less than 1 part in 60th is permitted. That's not the opinion of some Rav. That's what it says in the Gemara. No room for being strict there. Refraining from eating that is apikosis. Refraining from eating that is heresy. Well, something which is not explicit in the Gemara, and depends upon the way this Rav understands the Gemara, oh, there it's permissible to be strict. Kol adam yachol legdol et kadesh atzmo af mutalo ein lo kasif. Chazal, in the case where the decision depends upon the Rav's opinion, that's the case which justifies being strict if you wish to embrace the strict practice. Let's summarize what we have. According to the sources focus primarily on kashrut, but exactly the same principles apply throughout the length and breadth of Torah. The idea is that being strict above and beyond the minimum requirements of halacha is permissible if the situation depends upon the opinion of one Rav, and the reason you wish to be stricter is to distance yourself from any possible error, then it's permissible to be strict. Otherwise, there's no room for chumrah, no room for strictness at all. I'm going to pause at this point and ask you if you have any questions you wish to pose. Any questions?
Thank you, Rav Fink. Feeling a bit under the weather. Thank you so much for the class, as always.
You're welcome. Okay, that's it for today. I wish you a good week and a safe week, and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Shabbat shalom.
So much.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom l'kulam.
Oh, we miss you over here.
And are you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sei gewünscht. Kol tov.
It's always so worthwhile. Would you like me to take out your garbage on my way out? I'm going to the shuk.
You're
There's
going
a
to the
garbage.
shuk.
Yeah.